Hello there, this is video 3 in our series of using Fluid Designer for 3D printing, where we're talking about tips and tricks on how to improve the quality and the work that you do. Now in this video we're going to look at surface finish. In video 2 we looked at how you can improve the surface finish by using NURBS curves instead of Bezier curves. I'm now going to look at how you can add additional control points using Subdivide and Smooth, and how that will improve the surface finish. So if we go to Fluid Designer for 3D printing, and I've opened up this Celtic knot, and as you probably saw if you looked at video 2, this is actually a Bezier curve, and we can see the kind of straight bits here, which is a function of the Bezier curve. Now if I turn that count down to 1 there, so I've just got one object. If I go to Tools, Object Tools and convert that to a mesh, you can see that as a mesh it's got about 23,000 faces, which gives it a certain smoothness to the object. But as you can see, as I move in, we can see some sort of straight edges there. If I just do Control Z and undo that, one way of increasing the quality of this is by going into edit mode. So if I press the tab key on the keyboard to go into edit mode, I'll just press the home key to put it in the middle of the screen there. You can see that the control points are actually highlighted. Now what I can do is I can add additional control points between each of these, and we need to do that using the specials menu. So if I press the W key on the keyboard, W for the specials menu, and if I click Subdivide, you'll notice that when I do that we get an extra control point there between each of the existing control points. But we've still got this sort of straight edge feature of our curve. So if I hit W again, there is another command here, another special command, which is Smooth. So if I select Smooth, and if I do this several times, and I usually do it somewhere between 3 and sort of 5 times, as you're doing it you should see that this curve is smoother than it was before. And if I come out of edit mode now, and if I go to Tools, Object Tools and convert that to a mesh, I've now got 46,000 faces. So I've sort of more or less doubled the number of faces here. But as you zoom in, you can see it is distinctly smoother than before. Okay, so you can increase the number of control points. You can increase the number of control points by using the W key on the keyboard and going to the specials menu, and then smooth them off. But of course there is a downside to that, in that the face count will increase dramatically. And if you're, as is the case with this object, creating a bracelet, you may find that when you've got 20 or 25 of these in a circle, you may end up with more than 1 million faces. You may not be able to upload it to Shapeways, for example. So you do need to consider where you're getting it and how you're getting it 3D printed, and just what is the maximum number of faces that you can actually have in your file when you send it to your printers. Obviously if you're going to print it yourself, you've not got that same issue. So there can be a bit of a trade-off between smoothness and where you're getting it printed in terms of the final face count. You don't want to be exceeding 1 million faces if you're sending it to Shapeways. Okay, so that's one way of increasing the smoothness of the surface. You can increase the number of control points and use Subdivide and Smooth. That's when you're working with curves. When you've actually got your object as a mesh, so if for example we've convert this to a mesh, just that part of it, you can use Subdivide and Smooth here. So if I press the tab key to go into edit mode and press the A key on the keyboard, That will highlight the object as a mesh, and if I press the W key on the keyboard, I can get Subdivide and Smooth here, so I can do Subdivide. Now at the moment there are what have we got? We've got 230,000 faces at the moment, so if I hit W and Subdivide, and here's where you've got to be careful, because I'm suspecting that the faces might exceed 1 million when I do this. Just the way that it chops it up, and as you can see, yes, well, so we're up to 921,000 faces there, so we are still within Shapeway's limit for this object. So that's increased the faces, and if I do W on the keyboard now and smooth that off, and because there are so many faces now, my computer's not that fast, it will take a little bit of time to do this. I would recommend do that 3 or 4 times just to smooth off the surface of this object, and it will make it smoother, it will round it off, it will improve the surface finish by doing this. A lot of faces in this one, so it's not so easy to actually see it, but if I zoom in now, you can see the surface finish of that looks really good compared to before. Okay, so you can use Subdivide and Smooth with control points, with curves, and you can use it with meshes as well. And another way to improve the surface finish is to use a Subsurf Modifier. So if I go back to Fluid Designer for 3D printing, if I just go to File and Open Recent, if I open the Celtic Knot bracelet again, and if I just take the count down to 1, okay, so here's our 1 Celtic Knot pattern object. That's got about 22,000 faces. If I go to Tools, Object Tools, if I convert that to a mesh, you can see it's got about 23,000 faces. Now this object looks quite smooth anyway, but if I wanted to smooth it off even more, I could add a Subsurf Modifier. And if you notice now, the faces goes up to 92,000, and the value to change in Subsurf Modifier is the view. That takes it back to 23,000 faces. That takes it up to 92,000. A view of 2, as you can see, takes it up to 368. So we're getting quite large just for this one object here. But we are smoothing it off. But we're now way over 1 million faces. So you can't do many subdivisions with this object here, because it already had a lot of faces to actually start with. Now where do I really use this Subsurf Modifier? Well, if I go to File and New, let me take you and let me show you some slightly different object that I've got on my system. I'll go into the lighting folder, and I'll show you this object here. Now this object isn't in fact a curve, it actually is a mesh, this object. And it's a lampshade essentially, and it's been built up using these modifiers over here, and the final modifier is this Subsurf Modifier. And if I zoom in here, at the moment it's got 84,000 faces, and if I turn the view down, you can see better with this object what happens. There's my basic object, look, with only 1,324 faces, right? But to make this a 3D printable object, really, I want to sort of smooth it off, and I can do that by using this Subsurf Modifier, where there we're up to 5,000, 21, and what you generally find is once you get to about 3 or 4, you can end up with a very nice surface finish. That's not a bad surface finish for this object there, at 340,000 faces and a view value of 4. So again, if we take that back to 0, no subsurf, you can see we've only got 1,300 faces. If we take it up to 4, we get a nice smooth finish. So the Subsurf Modifier is best used with objects that are actually meshes to start with and don't have too many faces to start with. It's a way of smoothing them off. Okay, so that's the Subsurf Modifier. It's a very good way of smoothing off your surfaces, but you do again need to watch the number of faces. Really, really important that you don't certainly you don't want to be exceeding 1 million, generally speaking, as the face count. Okay, so what's the next thing that we want to do after looking at improving the surface finish? Well, how about reducing the number of mesh faces? Well, one way of reducing it is by deleting control points. I just showed you how with the, let me just open it up again, the Celtic knot one, I showed you how, let me just set it down to 1 and press the tab key to go into edit mode. I showed you how we could use the W and subdivide to increase the number of control points. Well, one way to reduce the face count here is if you zoom in, and if I hold down the shift key and if I select every other control point, and I'm just going around it selecting every other control point. Okay, and I'd have to go around the whole object, and then if I do X on the keyboard and delete those vertices, so I've taken out some of the vertices, then I will reduce the face count. Alright, but obviously that will reduce the smoothness of the surface at the same time, so you do need to be aware of doing that when working with Fluid Designer for 3D printing. So you can reduce the number of control points, X on the keyboard to delete them, and it's a good idea to delete the whole lot in one go, or rather every other one. Highlight them all and delete them in one go. I'm not going to do that because it does take quite a while to do. But it will reduce your control points, and it will therefore reduce the number of mesh faces. Now another way of doing it is to use a Decimate Modifier. Well, let me go back to my Catalan curve lampshade here, and the subsurf is set at 3 at the moment, so it's got 84,000 faces. So if I actually go to Tools, Object Tools and convert this to a mesh, that will apply the modifiers, and I've now got 84,000 faces. Now that's not particularly high, but if I wanted to reduce it to a smaller value than that, I could use the Decimate Modifier. So we've got 84,736 faces, and we've got a ratio of 1. Well, if I click in here and if I type 0.5, what it will do is it will look at the faces in the system and it will reduce them. Now it hasn't reduced them by a factor of 1/2. It hasn't gone from 84,000 down to 42. It's only gone down to 60,000. But it has reduced the face count. So if I type in 0.1 there, for example, it will take it down even further. But obviously as you do this, the surface finish will not be as smooth. So we're down to 15,000 faces, and we can see them now when we zoom in. So if I just delete the Decimate Modifier, you'll see that it smooths it off again. Yeah, so that's a way of actually reducing the face count. You can't do that with a curve object, you can only do it with mesh objects. So if you do find that you create something that's got more than 1 million faces, and you want to reduce it below 1 million faces, you can add a modifier, you can add a Decimate Modifier, and you just change the ratio value here to reduce down the face count.